You can definitely call it an escalation. Washington and Tehran upping the ante dramatically in the past week after the bill signed New Year's Eve by President Barack Obama that threatens sanctions on financial institutions that deal with Iran's central bank. Iran test firing medium-range missiles in the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil transits every day. Now, this Tuesday, the top commander of Iran's army warning U.S. warships not to return to the strait. But muscle flexing comes at a cost. While U.S. voters see the price at the pump rise, ordinary Iranians feeling the pinch in a big way, with their currency plummeting. Iranians who have their own election coming up, a March parliamentary poll, the first big election since unprecedented protests back in 2009. And if Iranians boycott those in numbers, could the regime possibly face a far bigger crisis at home than with its adversaries abroad? Today in the France 24 debate, Iran under pressure. And with us to talk about it from Tel Aviv, political scientist Maher Javed of MIPAS. Thank you for being with us. From Los Angeles, Mohammed Sahimi of U.S. Public Broadcasting System PBS's news site, TehranBureau.com. Ali Fatemi, who teaches at the American Graduate School of Business and Economics. Thank you for being with us. And Rouzbeh Parsi of EU think tank, the European Union Institute for Security Studies. The France 24 debate, where you can weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and also on Twitter, our handle here at FrancoisF24. As we mentioned, this Tuesday, the conclusion of those naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz with this blunt warning to Washington.
In my opinion, the enemies who needed to leave have left. After our drill, the enemy's carrier was moved to the Sea of Oman. And our belief is we are not starting anything unreasonable, but we are ready for any threat. We advise, we recommend, we warn them not to return because we are not in the habit of repeating our warnings.
Now, the Pentagon responding a short while ago with a statement: the deployment of U.S. military assets in the Persian Gulf region will continue as it has for decades, end quote. Maher Javed, tell us this is all just saber-rattling.
I would like to say that this is just saber-rattling, but I'm becoming really concerned because the Iranian government today basically issued a challenge to the United States Navy, saying that if they come back, there could be confrontation. And the Americans have just said, we are going to come back. So the pressure is increasing by the minute. But I think in the long run, I think the party which is looking like the weaker party is the Iranian government here, because I think they're basically weakening themselves, at least diplomatically, if not economically, on the international stage. Basically, the recent threat that they were going to close the Strait of Hormuz backfired badly, because that basically made Iran look like the aggressor, and it made a lot of the Persian Gulf countries very concerned. And I think, at least diplomatically, they were placed further inside the anti-Iran camp with the United States. And I think with the new threat, yes, there is a big there's going to be a big increase in pressure between the two sides, but I really don't think the Iranian Navy is going to be ready to launch an attack against the United States aircraft carriers that are going to be in the Persian Gulf. And after this challenge, if they don't do it, they're going to look even weaker. So I would say in the short term, there is more pressure, but in the long run, I think at least diplomatically, economically, and perhaps strategically, the way the Iranian government is handling this situation is making itself the weaker party and is losing more alliances, diplomatic leverage, and damaging its own economy.
Rouzbeh Parsi, do you agree that whatever happens next, someone's going to lose face?
Well, I think both parties, in a sense, are losing face. The question is which one is going to lose the most. But in terms of the Persian Gulf, I think the problem here is that both these actors have very big egos and a lot of dangerous toys, and the sandbox they're playing in is very, very small. I mean, there's a history of mistakes being made that could have led to a deadly escalation. If you look at, for instance, what happened when the US had forces there in 1988 when they shot down a civilian airline passenger, and just this year when the Iranian gunboat was almost shot at by a British vessel because it was coming too close. So, I mean, besides whether they're actually trying with intent, there is also the danger that something will happen by mistake because everyone wants to play the game.
How big is that danger of a mistake?
I think it's much bigger than we would like to think, and it's much bigger than it ought to be.
Do you agree with that, Ali Fatemi?
Well, I personally think most of this is just hot air. There used to be one person in Iran who used to shoot his mouth without knowing what he's talking about, Ahmadinejad, and now everybody's taking after him. These guys don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the whole world is listening. They think that they like what they say for the sound of it domestically, and they don't realize that the analyst will look at these things, they take him seriously. But I really don't believe the Iranian Navy or armed forces are anywhere close to challenging the U.S., or I doubt it very much. And I don't think this is going to get to anywhere. I think the Iranians are the ones who are going to back down, and hopefully the U.S. plays it smart and does not do anything rash.
Do you agree, Mohammed Sahimi, that Iran's president is in over his head?
Well, I think the military maneuver and also the warning by Major General Ayatollah Salehi is mostly for internal consumption. They want to keep the population sort of excited and nationalistic. But at the same time, as Mr. Parsi pointed out, there is also a history here that cannot be neglected. We have to remember that in 1987, 1988, the Navy of the NATO alliance intervened in the Iran-Iraq war and started escorting the Arab oil tankers that led to U.S. Navy attack on Iranian offshore installation and also shutting down Iranian airline passenger that killed 290 people. So there is a history here that cannot be ignored, and both sides are actually contributing to increasing tension in the region. I would, if I were in the charge of Iranian government, I would not do this type of saber-rattling that they are doing. But at the same time, unlike what the other guest said, I don't believe that while it is true that Iranian Navy cannot confront the U.S. Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf in a conventional war, they have quite capability in terms of asymmetric warfare that can lead to a major war in the Persian Gulf. So both sides should be very careful about what they are saying and what they are doing.
All right, and should mention that as a result of what's going on, the price of oil this Tuesday above $100 a barrel in New York. It's flirting with 6-month highs. Mayor Javandafar, you penned a piece a couple of days ago in which you say that the U.S. President, Barack Obama, if he's not careful, could face a Jimmy Carter moment.
But at least, yes, that was my take from a recent article I read in an Iranian website. It was a point of view article, which I agree with. The Iranians realize that the economy is the Achilles heels of President Obama. So by basically issuing these challenges, they know that the natural reaction in the oil market is that the price of oil shoots up. So within less than a year to go prior to the U.S. elections, if the price of oil reaches new highs, if more people lose their jobs in the United States, more businesses are shut, the basically popularity of President Obama is going to plummet, and he could basically lose his election on that. So I think this is a danger. President Obama has to be very careful here. And I think this is why with the new sanctions, I don't think he really wanted it. I think he was basically pushed through the door by the Congress to basically carry it out. And he has to be very careful. He does reserve the right to waive them if they're causing too much damage to the U.S. economy. But that could also go against him, because the Republicans could say that basically, he basically chickened out, if you want to say, in front of Iran. So he's a weak leader. So he's in a very, very difficult situation. I think President Obama should really hope that the price of oil doesn't reach unbearable highs, because after that, no matter what happens, it will be against him. But there's one thing I would like to say, François, one thing that really worries me about the United States, and that is the recent congressional drive to ban diplomacy with Iran. This is something that the entire international community, including the government of the State of Israel, has to be worried about. If we shut the door of diplomacy with the government of Ayatollah Khamenei, we are helping them. This is exactly what he wants. This regime thrives in isolation. Every time the international community has gotten close to them, the regime has weakened, there's been more infighting, because believe it or not, there are people within the regime who don't agree with the way the nuclear file is being handled. And by shutting the door of diplomacy, not only are we cornering ourselves, not only are we limiting our options, we are basically helping the hardliners. We don't want that. We want to weaken them. We want to talk to them. I don't think there will be a miracle and we'll have peace with Iran or understanding within 2 months. But if we close the door of diplomacy, this will be a huge boost for a regime and for hardliners within Iran who are losing legitimacy within the halls of power.
Hardliners within Iran, hardliners also in the United States, an election there, as we mentioned. The Iowa caucus is taking place this Tuesday, and there too the ante raised, as Meir Javandafar was saying. Let's just listen for a moment to the Republican frontrunner.
Probably the greatest threat we face in the globe is a nuclear Iran. And he said he was going to engage Iran. Remember, and visit with Ahmadinejad in his first year? Didn't quite work out like he hoped. Iran pursuing their nuclear ambition, announced yesterday they've now developed a nuclear rod. They tested a medium-range surface-to-air missile. Iran continues to be and is actually a greater threat than when he became president.
Mohammed Sahimi, I know that for TehranBureau.com, you've penned a piece on basically comparing what the different Republican candidates have to say about Iran. Can you explain for our viewers why the rhetoric is going crescendo where you are?
Well, one reason for it is that the Republican candidates think that President Obama has successful in terms of his foreign policy, except for Iran. And of course, bringing Iran is not everything to the support for Israel. And the GOP candidates are trying to attract the Jewish vote in the United States by claiming that President Obama hasn't been
Mohammed, I'm going to have to cut you off because we're having technical issues. You're fading in and out, but we will get back to you in a moment. Ruzbeh Parsi, we've seen, explain to us from your view, why do you think that in the U.S. the tone is rising so rapidly there?
Well, basically you can say when it comes to Iran, there is no candidate for any kind of elected office that has lost anything by being harsh on Iran. And what you have here is, in a sense, the perfect storm. Because on the one hand, the Democrats, because they usually are very pro-Israeli, they take the Israeli line on how dangerous Iran is. And the Republicans are trying to win exactly the same vote. And so they also want to show Obama being weak in general when it comes to foreign policy. So this kind of barely regional power, Iran, is now become a global threat, according to these candidates, almost a par with Soviet Union, which is, of course, quite absurd.
And we see on this one that Washington's friends extend beyond Israel. The French foreign minister spoke out this Tuesday. Let's take a listen.
Iran is still developing nuclear weapons. I think there's no doubt about that. The International Atomic Energy Agency's report is quite explicit, and that's why France, without foreclosing negotiation and dialogue with Iran, of course, wants stricter sanctions.
All right, you note the distinction there. He says we're not closing the door to negotiations, but the French, very hard line as well.
You know, it's funny. This panel is giving me a funny feeling. You guys are talking just like Iran is the aggrieved party. Here we have a nation which has enslaved its own people for over 30 years. When people vote, they steal their votes. They threaten all their neighbors. They are refusing to cooperate with any arrangement for international things. And you guys are sounding like they are really the poor guys that the U.S. and everybody else is ganging on them. That's not the case. The question is this government has no legitimacy, and therefore having a foreign enemy is the only way they can stay in power. They are going to continue making agitations. because that's the only way that they try to get people's attention away from their domestic problems. Look at what is happening to the country. Inflation is over 30%. Unemployment is close to 20%. The country's money has lost its total value. Again, this is their own fault, because before they were keeping the price of dollar down artificially in order to fight inflation and to make imports cheaper. As a result, they killed the export of the country, and cheap imports from China closed all the factories and people are unemployed. I mean, we are talking about a monster in that part of the world. We are not talking about legitimate government. We are not talking about people who understand international norms of behavior. They go and kill people in other countries. They send terrorists all the way to Argentina. I mean, let's make some sense. I mean, the world cannot go on tolerating something like this forever. I'm sure sooner or later something will happen.
What do you mean by something will happen?
Well, most probably, if they continue this, it just takes one mistake, and we'll be facing another war. And I think that's what they want. That's exactly what they're asking for.
I am afraid I don't really recognize myself in that description, if nothing else, because the issue that we're discussing is not whether there is a celestial kind of government in Iran. The issue is whether or not there is an international situation where they're part of a game that could lead to a deadly conflict with other countries. And obviously no one here, in the sense of the actors involved, is totally without guilt. Now, we can discuss how much of the guilt should be on either side, but the issue wasn't whether Iran is run by a perfect government. The issue is whether this kind of dynamic is getting us anywhere. If you allow me just for a moment, we have now sanctions. We've had sanctions for a number of years. Now, they've had an effect on the Iranian economy. They've had an effect on Iran, but they have not been effective in terms of what they were put in place for, which is the nuclear issue. We only recently have started having sanctions because of the human rights record of Iran. But in general, these sanctions based on international law have to do with Iran's obligations to the NPT treaty and nothing else.
Just before we go to the break, Meyer Javandafar.
I have to respectfully disagree with my colleague Rouzbeh Parsi. I think one of the reasons why Iran has not had a nuclear weapon is because of the sanctions, Rouzbeh. It's because the Iranian government is finding it so difficult to get the parts for its nuclear program. And if you want to know if the Iranian government wants to build a bomb or not, I refer you to the recent IAEA report. And I think this is not a situation where we are trying to see who is better or not. We are dealing with a government that is threatening its own neighbors. And we just want to make sure that when it comes to handling this government, we are not going to be the only losers. Because believe you me, when it comes to Iran being a danger to Israel, Rouzbeh, I don't have to listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I walked down Dizengoff Street. 3 buses blew up on that street with Iranian money and Hamas operatives. This is not some fantasy we're talking about. It's a real danger to the citizens of Israel, and we just want to make sure that a peaceful solution is found that spares us from war. This is not something that is to be taken lightly.
All right, and when we come back with the France 24 debate, we're going to look a little bit more closely at how those sanctions are impacting Iranians. You're watching the France 24 debate. Stay with us.